It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the program. Good morning to you. We're in the home stretch here in the broadcast, and we really appreciate you listening. The website is jihadwatch.org. And the man is Robert Spencer. He's the director of Jihad Watch. He has led seminars on Islam and jihad for the FBI, the United States Central Command, the United States Army Command, and General Staff College, the U.S. Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the Justice Department's Anti-Terrorism Advocacy Council, and the U.S. intelligence community. Robert Spencer joins us now. Robert, welcome to the program, sir.
Hey, great to be here. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Now, you're also the author of the new book, The History of Jihad, From Muhammad to ISIS. What can you tell us about that?
This is the first and only one-volume treatment in the English language of the entire history of jihad activity, violence by Muslims in order to impose Islamic law around the world, starting in the 7th century and going right up to today. Of course, this is the motivation behind the terror threat that we face around the world today, and it's what was behind 9/11, what was behind the Boston Marathon bombing, and many, many other things. And I show in the book that this is something that is a war that is 1,400 years old, is still being fought, has constantly been fought around the world. This is the first time the whole story of it has been told.
We got it up on the screen there for our online audience, The History of Jihad. You can get it on Amazon right there, folks. You can see it if this is something you're interested in. Robert, it's fascinating to me, as you know, I guess I was in high school on September the 11th, 2001, and I remember that day, very vividly. But this was kind of, I never knew anything about what was going on in the Middle East, never knew anything about it. And, it came to my country, it hit us home, and then, to see the transition from what happened in the Bush administration to the Obama administration. First of all, I just have to say it kind of shows the tolerance of this country. If you'd have told people on September 12th, 2001 that, 7 years later we're going to elect a man named Barack Hussein Obama, people would have said, no, there's no way. And yet, here we are. We did. But then they started stripping things out of the FBI in their manuals in any reference to what you call jihad. Isn't that correct?
That's right. And I show this in the book that after 9/11, Bush started it really when he went into a mosque 6 days after the attack and said that Islam was a religion of peace, while standing there with a man who is now in prison for financing Al-Qaeda and another who is the head of a Hamas and Muslim Brotherhood front. And Obama made it even worse by, as you say, he did in 2011, he forbade any mention of Islam and jihad in connection with terrorism. People find this really hard to believe, but it's 100% true. If you were to join the FBI today and go in, say you wanted to study counterterrorism, they would tell you all about so-called right-wing extremists, but they wouldn't tell you a thing about Islamic jihadis. As far as the FBI and the other intelligence agencies are concerned, there is no jihad threat, and this has not yet changed, although President Trump, of course, has been very clear that he wants it changed. It has not yet been changed in the Trump administration.
I find that very frightening that we have, the civilian leader of the executive branch and these agencies that are supposed to be in the executive branch are not very responsive to the President of the United States. That's very concerning to me. Is it concerning to you?
Yes, it is. And this is really the first time this has happened in American history. I think that we all assumed that on January 20th, 2017, the new president would start implementing his program, and the people in the various government agencies would implement that program willingly. And this is the first time that we have seen what is really a large-scale revolt on the part of these agencies in refusing to implement the president's program and clinging to the programs of his predecessor. And this is something that's got to stop, because it's a grave threat to our entire republic, our electoral system. I mean, why even bother throwing somebody out and bringing somebody else in if the people who actually implement the policies aren't going to change anything?
That's exactly right. And we were actually talking about this last hour just on the border wall funding and how the American people voted for President Trump. One of the key things he said he was going to do was build the wall, and now we have members of the Republican Party saying they're not going to include it in the funding. So it's kind of along the same lines. It's like, okay, well, so do we not have the power of the vote, and the consent of the governed is being violated here left and right, and certainly on this concept of radical Islamic terror. Last week or back on the 24th, you had this, or I guess before that, but the Toronto shooting rampage. We have new details. Of course, just like everything else, Robert Spencer, they always are like, this has nothing to do with Islam, nothing to see here. And then, of course, a couple days later, we find out this guy's been to, ISIS websites and things like that. What were your thoughts on the recent shooting in Toronto?
I thought it was more of the pervasive denial that is absolutely blanketing the West in our response to the jihad threat at this point. That, for example, in the last chapter of the book, the one that's about jihad in this century, is called "The West Loses the Will to Live." And part of that loss of the will to live is the unwillingness or inability to name the enemy and to confront the enemy for what he really is and stands for. And this shooting in Toronto is just another example. The guy's visiting ISIS websites. That's not a rumor. That was reported by the Canadian police. And then the very same Canadian police, even after ISIS also claimed the shooting, said this has nothing to do with jihad or Islam, and it was all about he was mentally ill. And yet, also, police sources in Toronto said that they had never seen such a well-trained marksman, such an experienced and adept shooter. And you got to wonder, how did some mentally ill person who was fighting mental illness all his life become an expert marksman to the degree that he even impresses police officers who are also trained shooters?
That's a very good point. It's all but it's all suppressed. I mean, especially in Canada. Yeah. I mean, I found out about it from, believe it or not, CBS. I couldn't believe but CBS, I think, is willing to report stuff that does not here, domestic here in the United States. It's all suppressed. They can't bring themselves to admit it.
Yes, and things are getting very bad about this. It's as if the leftists claim that Muslims are victims and that they are never anything else but victims, and any discussion that is revolving jihad terrorism is to be forbidden because it further victimizes Muslims. This idea has taken root to such an extent. Here again in Canada, just a few days ago, there was a man who was protesting near the site of the shooting in Toronto and criticizing Islam. And he was standing in front of a fountain, and somebody grabbed him and threw him into the fountain, which could have caused him serious injuries. And the police were standing right there and did nothing, made no arrests, no charges, nothing.
Gosh. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen over in what we're seeing in Europe with the immigration situation there, and also London? I mean, we essentially have, and I don't think, and I know you agree with this, but this is essentially a Western civilization struggle, and in many cases, people on the left are somewhat suicidal. You just mentioned it, losing the will to live. Is there, with the Brexit that's trying to go on and things like that, and London or the UK trying to be more independent, do you think that they'll ever get a handle on this immigration crisis that's changing their society over there?
I don't think so. It seems as if the political elites are deeply committed to this idea of mass immigration. Just this morning, the Spanish foreign minister was saying, hey, we need new blood, and saying that these people ought to be coming in massive numbers because the native European population is decreasing. And so they're going to get new blood, and a lot of it's going to be spilled on the street. The problem of the mass Muslim migration is that among the peaceful migrants, you're going to get a certain number of jihadis. And those jihadis are going to be waging the same jihad that's been waged around the world for 1,400 years to try to bring about the conquest of Europe and its submission to Islam. The prophecy is attributed to Muhammad, the prophet of Islam himself, that the Muslims will eventually conquer Rome, and they've got a better chance to do it now than they ever have.
Yeah, everybody is they fail to recognize a threat, and that's certainly is unfortunate. What about the southern border? We're talking with Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch. It's jihadwatch.org, and he also does have a new book out. I want you guys to check it out, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. What about the southern border? Is there any threat? I mean, obviously we have unchecked people coming across the border there, but you've always heard these rumors, if you will, and I know they're not rumors, but the left certainly calls them rumors. You found a prayer rug on the border. What can you say about that?
It's much more than that, much more. I'll tell you something. You know that ISIS is not just in Iraq and Syria. Actually, they've been mostly driven out of Iraq and Syria, and they have dispersed around the world. And one of the hotbeds of ISIS activity today is Bangladesh. And in Laredo, Texas, the police have reported about 200 Bangladeshi nationals over the last year have tried to get over across the border illegally. Now, you got to wonder, why is a guy from Bangladesh going to travel to Mexico to sneak into the United States? Probably is some of those guys, at very least, are ISIS.
Yeah, that is absolutely terrifying, frightening. It's what's worse is that we had Maria Espinoza from the Remembrance Project. She was on here yesterday, and she was talking. It's an organization that is there to remember people who have been killed by illegal immigrants through illegal immigration. And we have people in our country, as far as the southern border and that issue, they're making the economic arguments. You have elites that, they want unchecked illegal immigration. It's going to keep the wages low and everything else. But no one is really talking about the actual danger here, the violent crimes, if not the jihadists, the potential there. And it's like we want the government to reinvent or invent new responsibilities, but they're abdicating their chief responsibility, which is, if you're going down to the southern border, Robert, we've posted signs saying, maybe you don't take the southern route along the U.S. side. Maybe you take the northern route because we can't guarantee your safety. I mean, that is embarrassing that we, in our own country, we can't say, you're going to be safe within the borders of this country.
That's right. And it's an abdication of responsibility, as you say, on a massive scale, that combined with the abdication of responsibility to know the enemy, which is the first step toward defeating him, that has been committed by the Obama administration and is still going on in terms of the jihad threat, it spells disaster in the future, and this has got to be changed. To his credit, the president keeps insisting.
And I really hope so. Are you optimistic? Do you think that President Donald Trump, it seems like we've come a long way. I can't remember if it was John Brennan or James Clapper in congressional testimony. He was asked, I believe, about the Muslim Brotherhood or one of these radical organizations, and he was apologizing for them. He was saying that they're not terrorists. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was Clapper. Yeah.
Okay, Clapper.
He said that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the Brotherhood of Muslims. I mean, I know it sounds absurd. I'm saying the obvious, but it's not obvious because Clapper said the Muslim Brotherhood is a largely secular organization. In reality, the Muslim Brotherhood is just what it says it is, a Muslim Brotherhood that is dedicated to implementing the Quran and the political aspects of Islam and imposing them upon societies around the world.
So are you optimistic that President Donald Trump, he's at least using the bully pulpit trying to get changes here? Do you think we're going to see any of these changes in being able to correctly identify the threats to this country?
Well, they've already revealed a national security strategy that actually mentions Sharia, Islamic law, and identifies it as something that is incompatible with constitutional principles. That's extraordinary, and I applaud the president for that because Sharia does deny the freedom of speech, the freedom of conscience, the equality of rights of women, the equality of rights of non-Muslims with Muslims. And so that needs to be recognized, and it has never been before. As a matter of fact, the Obama administration actively supported Sharia state, and it was a very welcome thing to see, but it's essentially just a statement so far. It needs to be implemented.
Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch. It's jihadwatch.org and the new book, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS. Robert, I appreciate you coming on the program. It's great to meet you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Call me anytime.
All right. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Folks, this is Conduit News Radio. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back here in just a moment.